Do you want me to kick it off, Shelby, real quick?
Yeah, if you're ready to go, the mayor's going to be the first to speak.
Yep, I think everything looks good on the technology side. Thank you all for joining us this evening. I'm going to my name's Nikki Wilson. I'm going to be monitoring, moderating tonight's town hall meeting. So I will be monitoring the chat box for all of you that are out there throughout the presentation. I'll answer some questions as best as I can, if I can, during the presentation. But then there will be time at the end where any of the questions that come up in the chat, we will go through and then the panel will, our group will answer it as best as we can. If we don't get all of the questions answered, then we'll be sure to make sure we follow up with you on those as well. So I think that's kind of all I have from a housekeeping standpoint. So again, if you have a question, feel free to put it in the chat and I'll be monitoring that. And then I will turn it over to, I think Shelby's going to get us started, or the mayor. Oh, you're on mute, Shelby.
That was intentional. Mayor John King is going to kick us off. I will say Mayor King first asked our staff to provide an update about our planned water system improvements, but then June 5th occurred, in which we had a water system emergency. And so he also had asked us for an explanation of what had happened. And tonight we're going to be able to provide information about both. Today with us, we have the following people. I am Shelby Tufel. I am the city administrator. I've been with the city for 12 years and I've been in this role since 2018. I have nearly 20 years of experience in local government. Additionally, as she introduced herself, we have Nikki Wilson. She is our assistant city administrator and will primarily be the moderator for this session. Nikki has 2 different stints with the city of Pleasant Hill and a combined decade's worth of service to the city. Additionally, she served as the city administrator for the city of Odessa, Missouri, where she oversaw water and wastewater systems, which included treatment, distribution, and collection. We also have Tony Bakken, our public works director. He's been with the city for 4 years. He operates the water and wastewater system, oversees the work of the department, and plans for future improvements in coordination with the city's engineer. Tony came to us from the private sector with a diverse background, but specifically a background in construction and contracting. We also have Jason Clemmy, who's a civil engineer with Allstate Consultants, the city's contracted engineer. The city entered into a contract with Allstate Consultants in 2023, and Jason is our lead contact with Allstate, working out of the Lee Summit office. One of the great things that we've found about working with Allstate, or really any contracted engineering firm, is the depth of knowledge that they can bring to our city to be able to bounce ideas or projects between multiple staff members. And we're really glad to have that partnership with Allstate and Jason helping us with those system improvements. And finally, we have Kylie Baker, our communications specialist, who helped organize this event and market the event as well. And finally, Mayor, I will kick it over to you to kind of get us started.
All right, so again, want to welcome everyone to our first virtual town hall. City Council and I made it our goal to provide both a recorded and a virtual informational presentations, live and recorded meetings, and even the possibility of future live stream events so that every citizen can have access to their local government, whether they can, whether they're at home, at work, they're traveling. We chose this one as a virtual one to kind of kick it off. Our goal is here in the very near future to be able to also have these where we can do them in person and virtually. So our council chamber is going through some final updates for that kind of equipment. I'm certain that our first virtual town hall will have areas where we can learn and we can improve from moving forward, but this process has to have its first steps. So following the June water emergency, it was important that the city of Pleasant Hill take the time to review the events of that emergency, our response, the aftermath, and even the events that led us to that incident. Post-incident reviews are aimed at determining how and why an event occurred, and these are necessary to prevent further occurrences of similar events. And more importantly, it's accurate information is necessary to establish trends, conduct analysis, and assess the effectiveness of our ongoing mitigation and remediation projects. Rarely are these types of events due to a singular cause or one precise issue. They are most often interrelated conditions related to a myriad of causes, including unrecognized hazards, ineffectively or missed assessed hazards, errors, omissions, unanticipated process changes, program deficiencies, ineffective material designs, and even things outside of our control like acts of nature. The response to this event included not only our local resources, but state agencies, our partners in the water, wastewater delivery infrastructure, neighboring municipalities, and assistance from our state representatives from both the legislative and executive branches of Missouri. We've had experts along the way ranging from infrastructure, conservation, engineering, and emergency management that we task with assisting the city in not just our response, but the review of it and the mitigation of the water emergency that we had. At the end of the day, our goal is to improve our infrastructure, improve our system to prevent these types of events, and improving our response to these events in order that they limit the impact that they have on our residents. As Shelby said, we'll make every effort tonight to answer questions at the end of the presentation. If a response requires us to research an answer for you or to provide a more detailed response, we may have to provide you with that outside the presentation, but we will make every effort to make sure everyone's questions get answered. And I will now turn this presentation back over to the city administrator, Shelby Tufel. Thank you, Shelby.
Thank you, Mayor. We know, I do want to say that we will primarily be focused on water system improvements, but we will touch a little bit on sewer improvements as well. We know that the state of the water system is of high importance to you. The number of water main breaks and the system-wide boil advisories may seem extremely high to you, but we know that unfortunately we're not unique. Jason, Clemmy, and I were having this conversation earlier today, and honestly, they do it every single time that they comfort us to some degree whenever we also are exhausted by the number of issues within our system. And Jason was saying, like, this is not unique to Pleasant Hill. There are water systems throughout the state and the country that are in a very similar spot. I learned earlier this week that nationwide, the average water main replacement is completed 125 years after installation. That's on average across the entire United States. We've seen large cities like Atlanta and Houston have major outages. Locally, we've seen North Kansas City have a system-wide boil advisory. And even just this week, Water District 10 near Peculiar issued a boil advisory this week. Unfortunately, these system-wide improvements that are necessary and these unfunded improvements is not just us. Jason, do you have anything else that you want to add that's kind of happening on a larger scale in the industry?
Yeah, absolutely, Shelby. Thank you. And that was well stated. We have a little bit of a different perspective. Oftentimes we're dealing with a lot of different water systems across the state. A lot of times it's after crises have happened. And unfortunately, that's the state of a lot of these systems. If you look at data nationwide, there's report cards on infrastructure and water utilities specifically. And it goes so far as to say that the American Water Works Association would generally quantify a system that 10% of their water within their system, if it's leaking, that's considered a good system. A little bit above that as far as percentage of water loss is an average system. And then it varies. Of course, we have systems that go higher and higher. It's hard to feel that in the moment, but to me, I think it should be reassuring that you guys are not alone in this. It's just unfortunately a state of infrastructure that not only Missouri, not only the Kansas City region, but across the nation that we're experiencing.
Jason, I will also say in conversations we've had with you guys, or honestly, any of the other vendors that we're talking with right now about making improvements, they're actually highly encouraged by the progress that we are putting forward. And most have echoed the same thing where they will say, like, we've seen a much worse system than this. Like, you're on the right track and doing the right things for making those improvements into the future. And sometimes we also need that message as well.
Exactly. That is a good reminder.
Okay, so I wanted, the initial task was to describe what happened on June 5th, 2024. And I really felt like we couldn't discuss this without acknowledging the fact that it wasn't the first time that we've had a system-wide water shortage or outage in recent years. And for you as customers, we know that it seems like this is a recurring similar issue. But I wanted to really go back and cover all three of those system-wide losses so that you could see why maybe for you it's very similar. On our end, they were very different root causes, and it's not like we're repeating the same issue each time. So in October 2022, it was a Friday night in which we had a water outage. Our staff actually first learned of the loss of water pressure at the same time that our customers did. Our crews immediately began responding when there were calls into our dispatch center from the north end of our water system, and that sits at a higher elevation. And so if a higher elevation doesn't have water service, we knew that there was something major that was happening within our system and that it was very unusual. So in that case, there was after our kind of investigation and figuring it out, there's an electronic system that monitors our water storage levels, and we're able to set the parameters, and it tells pumps and valves when to open and when to turn on to distribute water throughout the system. And we call that system SCADA. In October 2022, the SCADA system control panel was fried, so it gave us no alerts. And it showed us a static image that we always had adequate water levels. We were continuing to monitor it. And every time that Tony would go in and he would look at, what our water levels were, everything looked excellent to us. What we missed was that it was static and had sat there at the same level for a period of time. And so it didn't turn on those valves, and it subsequently didn't turn on the pumps. And so it was a communication issue within the system, primarily actually to some degree, our main water supply with KC-Mo and the pump house. Due to the nature of this incident, it was immediate and it was imminent. We had no advance notice to tell our customer base. But once we were able to identify the issue, we manually opened valves and we manually operated pumps, and the water service was restored. We still asked our customers to conserve water so the water tower could refill as quickly as possible. And we did have to issue a boil water advisory because our pressures had reduced to a level below what DNR requires. Then in July 2023, one of our aging pumps at the pump house had a flange that broke and it flooded the pump house. At our pump house, all of our pumps are subgrade, and so both of the pumps were underwater. Our crews knew that all pumps needed to be removed, they needed to be dried, and they needed to be rebuilt. We were watching the water tower elevation gradually decline until pumps could be placed back in service. And I called that time period, I was getting really good at water tower math. I kind of knew each hour how much we would gain in elevation and also how much we thought our customers would be using in that time period. And I knew that timeline was going to be really close for us to be able to put those back in service. And so whenever we discovered this, we immediately asked our customers to conserve water, and we put in really strong conservation measures, including to our business community. And we always knew that timeline was going to be really tight. And we had the pumps back, they were in our possession, they were still being calibrated on July 4th, when our consumption exceeded the available water that we had in our elevated water tower. And the pumps were placed back in service approximately 30 minutes after the loss of pressure from that water tower. And, any amount of conservation that could have occurred in that time period would have changed that. That last minute calibration, I remember being at the pump house and being like, get it in, we're almost there. And we just weren't able to. And so again, we had to ask customers to continue to conserve the water so the water tower could refill as quickly as possible, and it prompted a boil water advisory. And I was pretty convinced, hopefully, that was going to be the only time in which this would have occurred. But again, this occurred on June 5th, 2024. And we once again had to ask customers for water conservation measures due to a system-wide loss of pressure. And so this one's, again, unique as compared to the other two. So we were doing routine maintenance. As part of our routine maintenance, the city was having water valves exercised. And what that means is they were being evaluated, turned, inventoried, and they were noted for repairs whenever they were needed. That was us investing back into our system. What we learned on June 6th, the next day, was that a closed valve was opened as part of that exercise. And so there was a main break in an isolated area that was making it really hard for us to see. What we later learned was that the mapping in that area was also incorrect, and the line that valve had been opened to was actually abandoned, which may have explained the number of breaks that we encountered on that line. That break, as we've indicated before, was located near ICF Industries, and it was closer to 58 Highway. That area is wooded, it's not accessible by the road, and it's bounded by the railroad tracks to the south. Our crews worked overnight, or throughout the day and overnight, to identify the source of the issue, including we did reach out to that contractor who performed the valve work, which in the moment, the information wasn't available to us. So we didn't know that that was the place to go look. We did walk remote locations. The police department was on site with us. Former employees were on site with us. We checked storm boxes. We checked for water even at Big Creek where we have a subgrade line. The crews did actually the police chief walked the ICF line that evening, but he just didn't go far enough south due to the higher wooded area. So whenever we're looking for water main breaks, one of the things that we do is we turn valves on and off to check the flow of water and to listen for leaks. And anybody in the water industry knows leaks have a very specific sound. And so I remember being out in the middle of the night with, public works employees with their ears to the ground, listening, trying to figure out exactly if we could ever figure out where it was. We had a pump running that was full force from the pump house to supply what amount of water we could into the system. On the morning of the 6th, we were beginning to lose system-wide pressure. We had closed a valve on the main transmission line to the water tower as we were trying to figure out what was going on. And at the same time, and Tony may want to chime in because he tells the story better, we got a call about a loss of water pressure on Spring Street. Spring Street is located in kind of a lower elevation on the south end of town, kind of near ICF, but it's a higher elevation of the lower elevation, if that makes any sense. And so Tony knew, let's go down to that area and start looking for the leak. And so actually, Tony, I'm going to pass it over to you because you just tell it so much better. Oh, Tony, you're muted. No. Okay, Nikki's going to go try and help him. So I'll go through this next part, but because we had that valve closed, near the pump house, whenever we went and found the issue at ICF, we closed that valve and the head pressure on the pumps increased immediately, which meant that we found the issue. The only downside was because that main transmission line was closed, it effectively squeezed the pressure in the downtown south zone. And we encountered a secondary water main break on the Veterans Parkway transmission line. So what may look to others from the outside is there was another line that broke. We know that to some degree we caused that because of the squeeze and pressure. And it looks like Tony has sound. So I don't know, Tony, if you want to fill in.
Can you hear me now?
I can. Yeah, we're good.
Okay. When we got that phone call to City Hall that morning, it told me that in that lower elevation that there was water that was being starved to that location, which kind of directed me to the area where the water loss was actually going to.
Which, Tony, honestly makes a lot of sense because what I remember in that night was we were like just north of the pump house, right? And I remember you and Jason both saying like, we can't hear any water coming here.
Yeah.
Why don't we hear anything north? And now it makes a lot of sense because every bit of water was going to the south.
Yep. Yep. So that's what actually sent us to that direction. And when we were making rounds, looking in secluded areas, looking for the leak, any indication of the leak, we actually turned down on 58 and was headed back into town westbound. When John was riding with me, he actually just barely saw the water coming through a culvert underneath the railroad tracks. And it was, very wooded. You just barely could see it. And then that's what brought us back up to ICF, and we found the valve at that time. We were able to isolate the leak.
Yeah, thank you. So once that valve was closed, our water pressure was restored, and we did have to continue those conservation measures to fill the water tower again, but that was the root issue. So one of the things that was different from this one, from an emergency operations standpoint, is that when we began to lose water pressure, we had not yet identified the root issue. I remember being in the pump house at about 6 a.m. with Tony and Jason, and we knew we were probably within a couple hours of losing water pressure to the system, but we didn't know where the issue was. And it becomes immensely hard to find a water main break or what an issue is when there's no water that could potentially flow into the system. And so we weren't actually certain that morning how long we were going to be without any water to our customers. And so the police department actually serves as our emergency management department. And I had contacted the chief. He was aware from the night before, and he was able to secure bottled water and canned water from the State Emergency Management Agency, also known as SEMA, because we really believed that there was a good chance that our residents may have prolonged period without drinking water. And that constitutes an even bigger emergency than we have water, but we have to boil it. It becomes really hard to search for that water when there's no water flowing through the system. One of the other things that we did in that moment, whenever we didn't think we were going to have water for a long period of time, that most people don't even know that we had coordinated, was we actually also brought in portable restrooms. And we're willing to deploy them in multiple places throughout the community, because we also know that that also constitutes a different type of emergency. We had them on site throughout the week, and thankfully water service was restored within a couple hours from that. So yes, our ability to provide bottled water and canned water was amazing in the moment, but that is not always going to be the case. It was because of the unique conditions of this one. Our staff also moved into emergency operations mode very quickly. We operated a command room, we had staff, elected officials, a representative from SEMA was on site, and a representative from the Department of Natural Resources was also on site. We were able to lean on our partners in other cities or other water districts who responded, even contractors who answered calls overnight and throughout the remainder of the week. Tony had mentioned John, who he's referencing is John Overstreet, the director of Tri-County Water Authority, who helps us numerous times over the years, and also is somebody we coordinate with whenever we need an additional supply of water.
Yeah, he's a great partner.
Excellent partner. Additionally, Odessa Public Works offered mutual aid to repair the water line on Veterans Parkway. And in the middle of the night, Belton Public Works also offered mutual aid to conduct leak detection and came back a couple different times throughout the week to help us identify some leaks. And we had multiple other water districts like District 11 come on site or reach out to us directly to offer their assistance. The other thing that's a little bit unique on this one is that the first set of water samples, because we do have to do water sample testing whenever our pressure drops below 20 PSI. In this case, it did. And those water samples take anywhere from the fastest that it could ever be done is in 18 hours. There's an 18-hour test and a 24-hour test. So we know once we get to that point, we have at least another day. In this case, we wanted to make sure that the water tower was completely full and that we had put the water back into the water system before we were able to collect the samples. Our first set of test samples weren't absent of bacteria, although I will note there was no E. coli that was found in it. And we had to retest, and that prolonged the boil advisory. We were in contact with the Department of Natural Resources the entire time, and they advised that the boil advisory remained in effect and that it was never to the point in which it was a boil order, which is when there are known contaminants, specifically E. coli. So I wanted to take a minute, and Tony, feel free to chime in if you want to, on kind of the things that we do whenever these incidents occur. One of the first things that we try to do is we try to source the issue immediately. We deploy our own staff, we investigate, we look for breaks. Our billing department looks for breaks that may be occurring on the customer side. In this case, the city, well, in all times, but the city supplies water to Water District 1. And so that was one of the first places we looked as we were also doing our own investigation is, was there potentially a break in Water District 1? Was there a lot of water that was flowing through their meter? That's not the case, but it's one of the places that we look. We check and manually verify the levels compared to SCADA. We work with our partners in the water supply industry. We typically, one of our first calls is also to John Overstreet at Tri-County Water Authority, saying we're going to need a little bit more of a supply, or sometimes it will be to Kansas City, Missouri. If time allows, as it did in July 2023, we notify large water customers for conservation first. We try to minimize the impact on all of our customer base. Especially in this one, we calculate water tower levels, supply, consumption. Jason and Tony worked throughout the day we kind of have an estimate of our customers use so much water during the day and then it tapers off overnight. Here's where we think the water tower level will be at a certain hour. And what they're really also trying to figure out is, are there ways that we can supply more water into the system without overburdening the system with too much pressure? I contact the mayor and council. We notify the Cass County Health Department if there's a boil advisory. And then we do customer outreach. We contact the news media. We do phone calls, text messages. And there are times that even we wish, and I know the council probably even more wishes than we do, that each step could be done more rapidly, but each step takes time. And we want to make sure that our communication with you is accurate and to the point. And this is becoming even more challenging for us as residents receive their information from a variety of sources. And we've recently found that utilizing the Everbridge notification system is our most direct method. And so I would highly encourage you to sign up for that if you haven't already. And one of the reasons is it's not dependent on you having that utility bill in your name. We know sometimes a landlord may have the bill in their name, but the tenant is the one that would need to make that conservation, or they would need to boil. It's also, you can sign up for residential and business notifications. So you can sign up for multiple addresses. Or if by chance you are taking care of somebody, such as a parent or grandparent, you can also sign up for their address, and then you can make that direct communication with them as well. And this may not be the right spot for it, but I did want to say, sometimes I think there's this myth in the community that the community has grown too much that the water system can't keep up with it. And as I reflect on all three of these incidents, it's important to note that the vulnerability was that the water couldn't get to the elevated storage tower. And that just goes to show how critical that pump house is to our operation. And just, a little bit of a stat here. With our average consumption, we have, or should have, 5 days worth of storage within the city limits at all times. And the amount of water that we can get from Kansas City, Missouri is 4 times the amount of our average consumption. So this isn't about the community growing. It's about making sure that the critical components of our water system have the ability to get water from our primary source at KCMO Water to our pump house, that the pump house is operating efficiently to get it to the elevated storage tower. And so, what I've really learned during this time period is if there is ever an issue with KCMO Water or our ability to get water to that water tower, we're really limited, and we typically only have 24 to 48 hours until that elevated storage is drained from normal consumption. And so whenever we ask for water conservation, we know that it's a matter of trying to spare a few more hours to avoid a boil water advisory and a system-wide loss of pressure. We don't issue those lightly, but we want people to take them very seriously. Okay, so I go through each of those to show that while our customers experienced and may have felt the same thing, as I mentioned before, they were very different for us. So for you as the end consumer, here are the things that were similar in all three instances. One, we increased our flow from Tri-County Water Authority. What we know is that Tri-County Water Authority in its present day configuration cannot supply enough water to meet the demand of our water system. Additionally, they also supply Water District 5, and it will always fill Water District 5 tower before it will fill ours due to the tower elevations. And so we kind of, to some degree, compete with water in these times with Water District 5. We had in all of these a limited ability to get water to the water tower. We asked all of you to conserve water. In all three, we experienced a system-wide loss of pressure, and we issued a boil water advisory for the entire system. But these were uniquely different or had overlap with another one. So as I mentioned, in October 2022, it came without warning, and it was a SCADA communication issue. Then in July 2023, there was a pump failure and flooding, but we did have time to communicate and plan or anticipate the loss of system pressure, and we're racing against the clock. During this event, we learned, this is the one where we learned the utility billing call system, which we were using previously to communicate, can't call during the evening hours due to the Fair Credit Reporting Act. And so we had to pivot our messaging that day because we tried to get messages out to the public, explaining the urgency that we needed even more conservation, but phone calls didn't go out, so they came out like the next morning. And personally, as somebody that was hand delivering messages to customers that didn't have phone numbers in our utility billing system, I learned that it can take nearly almost the entire time that the boil water advisory is in effect to go door to door. Going door to door during that time period is not an effective measure. We know that it's important to get this message out to the public, but we also need very efficient ways to do that. So between October and July, they're the same in that the issue really primarily resided within the pump house. Then in this last incident in June 2024, the open valve created the problem. And for that one, the unique thing is also that we deployed the water distribution. June 2024 shares a similarity with June 2023 in that we had a little bit more of an advance notice while we searched for the issue and monitored water levels. But then both in June and October, I wanted to note, even though this doesn't really have much of an impact on it, our system did experience a number of water main breaks leading up to that incident. And while it doesn't have an effect, it does lead to our staff fatigue and our ability to respond in a more timely manner, because we can't call in and deploy all of our resources at the same time. The cause of both of those, October and June, weren't immediately known, and it required us time to investigate the root cause. And both of those occurred in the overnight hours. And so I say all of that to show that the approach to fix these issues is really multifaceted. It's not the same recurring issue. And I know, because we've already heard it, we hear comments regularly. We know that some people may question why we're upgrading the pump house or the elevated water tower instead of repairing water mains. Those are honestly like the vital organs of the body. They have to be taken care of if we want to improve the reliability of the system as a whole. That's not to say that water main improvements don't need to occur. They do, and we're working on those. But that pump house and the elevated water tower are critically important to our operation. And so I wanted to just kind of give the recap of what had happened. And then I'm going to have Tony talk a little bit more about what we did to fix each of those issues, but then also what are we working on in the future.
Okay, thanks, Shelby.
Yeah.
Just to address the one in October, after the SCADA failure, we worked with Microcom, which is our supplier of our SCADA system, and did a complete upgrade on the system. Did troubleshooting, made sure that all the communications were coming back to the main box at Public Works station or Public Works shop. So we implemented, some manual, let's say double checks just to make sure that the system was, the SCADA system was right. And we were double checking that. In July of 23, with the flood, actually, I would say it was probably late October or late 2022. And I had already started kind of some prelim designs, visiting some other pump house stations, visiting with John from Tri-State, doing a lot of research as far as what we could do to make our system more reliable. One of my greatest fears happened on July 3rd that year, with that pump house flooding. We were already in the process of looking at trying to get the pumps at a higher elevation so that they wouldn't flood. We were looking at a new building. And I think it was shortly.
Oh,
Go
Tony,
ahead.
what I was going to say is even by July 2023, we had already funded in the budget pump station improvements.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so,
We were
like,
already working on that.
When that occurred, it wasn't like we had to really start from scratch and go, oh man, now it's time to make this improvement. We were already down that path. It just happened before we got there.
Yep. Yep. And then we were already looking at some redundancy to the pump house, making sure we had some bypass, just some additional safety nets, I guess you'd call it, to make sure that stuff doesn't happen like what happened in 23. We worked very hard with JCI, Yates Electric, Tri-County Water Authority to get the pump house back online as fast as possible. Once we found that it had flooded, we pumped out all the water, removed the pumps, disassembled the pumps, took them to their oven in their shop, baked them to dry them out, got them back together and got them back in place. I mean, literally minutes after we had lost pressure in the system. So with that, some of the ways that to prevent this in the future is we're working with Jason, and Jason will get into this a little bit more later on as far as what our pump house design is and, the things that we're looking at and the ideas that they brought to the table. June 2024, we were, working through the valve exercising program, as you had mentioned. Effectively, what we have done to fix I guess I would call it a communication issue, was that we've done more in writing. We're a lot quicker response from the contractor. We worked with the contractor to try to mitigate this issue. This has given us some opportunities to look at some cutting edge technologies as far as water leak locations, satellite imagery, listening to water lines. It's brought a lot of stuff to the table that we're learning a lot as we go.
Yeah, Tony, one of the things I will say on that one was one of the biggest challenges, and I think to some degree today too, was that line at ICF is not as it's mapped.
No.
And so we need to be able to identify what that alignment is. That is something I have been working on. I have contacted engineers. I have looked at plans at ICF. I have looked through all of our plans. We've looked through our as-built. Right now, we don't know what that configuration is down there. And we still, as a system, need the ability to do it. That's what we mean whenever we say we're still seeking additional information.
Yes.
I think one of the others that was endearing to me is maybe the word I want to use, was the number of water associations or water districts or public water supply districts or cities that would reach out and say, here's a resource, here's a contractor, here's like Lee Summit was like, any supplies you need, let us know, and you can come from our supply shop if the supplier doesn't have it.
Yeah, and
but
having other districts show up and just be here, Belton, District 11, Tri-County, all these
Yeah.
people that just, jumped in and helped out.
But, having conversations with the Rural Water, I think that's what it's called, like Alliance. Nikki knows the official name of it.
Missouri
But
Rural Water Association.
no, that's not the one I'm talking about. There was
Oh.
another one based out of
Okay.
Springfield. You'll know the guy's name because he kept calling me throughout the day. But MRWA and that alliance that I can't think of the name right now, they both talked through with me, like, here are some cutting edge, newer technologies that are coming out and emerging in the water and wastewater, or mostly water industry, that you might want to look at that can help you and we'll get into this a little bit later, but to monitor pressures or identify areas for leaks. And so I think it really, during that time period, not that we weren't focused on it before, but it propelled Tony and I to really start looking at, like, what are ways that we can improve the system, especially both between, honestly, him, me, and Jason, really trying to get the data at the same time. Like, and I remember during that time period, we had a series of breaks, and Nikki and I and Allstate kept saying, like, it's got to be a pressure issue. It's got to be a pressure issue. There's something happening within the system that is causing this number of breaks. We don't have enough monitoring of pressures throughout our system to identify, to rule that in or out of a potential reason.
Yeah, and we can do our best to run around and manually check at, at exhaustion. I've done that, monitoring and pressure testing and trying to find something that is happening within the system. I just haven't been able to find it manually with, a few gauges and, spike gauges on the system in certain locations. It's very difficult to figure that out without a pressure monitoring system.
Yeah, and I will say, for anybody that's listening too, I mean, Nikki and I were going so far as to look up utility billing, reports to see when some of our plants were ramping up or down, having conversations with some of our industrial users to see if there was any correlation. Like, just so you know, like, there's a lot that's been going on behind the scenes to try to also identify what some of those root issues are.
Yeah, we were actually looking at the times that the valves were being exercised and trying to match some time frames that would give us an indication, okay, this is why it was happening in this area and why we had another one over here. So yeah, there was just a lot of work behind the scenes that were going into it.
Yeah. Thanks, Tony.
So I guess if I can talk a little bit more on this one, some of the things that we've implemented to try to mitigate any potential for any type of reoccurrence, we put into some, what I like to call, trust but verify procedures, verifying that our SCADA system is working. We're double checking pressure gauges, calculating the water levels in the tower and in the ground reservoir, monitoring the head pressure on the pumps. Just we are continuing and to improve our maintenance of all of the system, making sure that everything's working the way it's supposed to, until we can get the renovations done on the pump house, which will make it a lot easier. We're doing more written documentation, keeping track, better logs. I think I spoke of, our work order system, being able to keep records much better, our mapping, improve our mapping. I think that's about it on this slide. I think that pretty much covers. We're trying everything we can and doing a bunch of research as far as new technologies. And
the only one that I will note on this one, Tony, was and I don't know if you guys get into this one later. At the pump house, one of the things that we have right now, and you guys are going to be able to better describe this than I am. Basically, pumps are on or they're off.
yes,
Like it kind of almost has what is a hard launch and a hard stop into the system, which can create some of those system pressure variations over time. So one of the improvements that we're making to the pump house is moving to VFDs. And what that's going to do is it's going to, like, slowly ramp up and slowly ramp down the pressure to create a more static's not the right word, consistent pressure into the water system. And that, like, literally anybody I talk to in the industry talks about like what that's like the first thing they ask, like, do you have VFDs? I'm like, nope,
Yep.
we're working on it. And they're like, great, that will help you immensely.
Yeah,
But
and
the
actually
other-
that's
Go
gonna
ahead.
improve our control of the pressure, because basically we can set those VFDs to run based off of pressure and not just an on-off switch, basically run off a SCADA to, okay, the elevated tower is full. Now we just shut the pumps off.
Well, and I think even on, in June, I was asking you and Jason, like, should we turn on a second pump, right? Do we need to move on to the second pump? Because clearly we need more water into our water system. Well, you don't have the ability to say, well, only to this pressure. It was all or nothing. And so at the time, it was a calculated decision of that isn't good for the system overall in the moment, but VFDs will allow you to increase by a little bit more.
Right.
If
We
that makes
can
sense.
variable it,
Yeah.
if there's not a better word for it, but we can vary that pressure. We can push up the gallons per minute and be able to monitor our pressure a whole lot easier. And
Right.
Jason could probably speak a little bit more on those, probably more intelligently than I can, but
No, I think that was perfect, and we'll certainly get into it a little more
Okay.
in the next few slides. But
So the other one is this bypass option. And so one of the things that I learned during this time again was how critical it was that everything goes through this. Our primary supply goes through the pump house. And one of the things that I learned on July 4th was that I was calling water districts, I was calling suppliers to figure out, is there any possibility to get another pump and put it in service while we're waiting for our others to dry? Is there a plug and play option here? And multiple people would say, like, yes, I have something. Oh, wait, I have it for a sewer pump. What I learned is in the water system, it became very difficult to do, and it always depends on it being the right size or something to that effect. And so one of the things that I'm actually really proud of are that Tony and Jason have worked out a system in which not only is there going to be a bypass option where it doesn't necessarily have to go through the pumps, but also that we have the ability to have an extra pump on hand that we can then put in service in case that happens. And to the best of our knowledge, that isn't regularly utilized in other places. And I make sure to tell this message to any city manager that will listen, and they realize, oh, we actually could have a vulnerability within our system too. So I think that's going to be a great improvement.
yeah, we've learned a lot,
Unfortunately.
unfortunately. Yes. And fortunately.
And fortunately. Yeah, I'll finally let you go to the next slide, Tony.
Okay. If you want to switch the slide there you go, Kylie. So some of the things that we are doing to be proactive is kind of like what I mentioned before, the trust but verify procedures. We are looking into, well, the pump house. We've already discussed that quite a bit. And that actually started in 22. We've already got some funded water line replacements. We're looking at relining a section of water line on Country Club that was presented to council just this last meeting. We are looking at, we've already done basically a system-wide replacement or rebuild of all of our PRVs, which are our pressure reducing valves, which do two things. It holds pressure back up into the higher zones and keeps pressure from being excessive in a lower zone. So it basically balances out the system. We've completed a valve exercising system, which is required by DNR. And it's also gained us a whole lot of information that is not depicted in our mapping system that we're going to be able to put into that mapping system and be able to update and have more current, accurate information from that. One of the things Shelby mentioned earlier was I've been researching some pressure monitoring systems, basically a full system pressure monitoring and temperature monitoring. There's two different types that we can look at. One is called an eye hydrant. It's a system that attaches to an existing hydrant or a brand new hydrant and will give us real live data, basically by the minute, that we can watch our pressure in our system, watch to hear or to see if we're seeing any what we call water hammer, any what I like to simply just call it waves in the system, because you'll see pressure spikes and pressure reductions. And then the other one is it's a meter system that goes in. It's basically goes into an address's meter pit, and we're able to gather information based off of that, what that meter is going to tell us. It'll give us pressures and temperatures as well. We're improving our design standards as far as installation, new subdivisions, stuff like, we've had several new subdivisions going in. We've improved our design standards to make sure that the pipe is installed correctly, that's bedded. Locate wires are in place where we can locate all of our system and keep track of everything, get it onto our mapping. Jason, if there's anything else that you want to throw in here as far as being proactive, I think you probably have a little more insight.
No, Tony, I think that was really good. I did just at a high level want to mention, and I don't know if it's common knowledge, but the city of Pleasant Hill has approximately 60 miles of water mains, obviously underground, out of sight. Those water mains vary in size, material, age, condition. Not only that, there's also approximately 20-ish miles of service line. So the service line literally connects to the mains and provides service to the meters. Then you add in, and all this is approximate, but you add in 800, 900 valves in the system, 500 to 600 hydrants, a pump house, and an elevated storage tank. It's a complex system that is, kind of invisible for the most part. So when we talk about researching new technology, a lot of that is gaining access to the system. When we talk about valve exercising, another component that's huge is we can approximate line sizes that are unknown.
Yep.
So it all really feeds on each other, and we can kind of explain, I can do it now on the coming slide, of how we utilize that info in somewhat sophisticated hydraulic models. Because every little component of the system that has a purpose, also impacts how the system operates. So it really does tell a story. Going back to the pump house, and I think it's on this slide too, to me, that really is the heartbeat of the system. We don't have our own water treatment plant here in Pleasant Hill. We get water from other jurisdictions, and we need to pump it to make sure that we can get it to the end user. Obviously, there's been a few issues over the years with the pump house. It was built in the late 60s, mid 70s, somewhere around that time frame. And, over the course of 50 years, regulations that are brought down from federal or state cause changes to systems, changes to your requirements, good changes that address water quality, water service. But for that reason, we've identified these changes that we can take to the existing structure itself, which has good bones, good facility, but update the systems, update the equipment in such a way that we're being cognizant of cost, but also addressing the needs within the system. And Shelby, you had mentioned something earlier about growth. We have tons of data over the years. I think the data I was looking at earlier goes back to 2006. Since 2006, we've added 400 service connections to the Pleasant Hill system. We went from 2,700 all the way up to 3,100 now. Over that same period of time, our water usage by the community has dropped from about 200 million to 170 million gallons a year, just this past year. And that's matching national trends. And a lot of that's attributed to advanced technology in, say, your washing machine, your dishwasher, how we utilize water. So just kind of an aside there, but an interesting fact of our water system, or at least our service connections are growing, but our trends on our water usage is actually going down, which is, I think, is fairly interesting. All right, enough rambling. What's next? We've spoken a little bit to the projects we're implementing in various stages, design stage, construction stage. We'll get into a little more detail on that. That next bullet point, I really want to hit home. You'll see it says create an owner supervised 5-year plan. What is that? That is a really cool tool. I'd like to call it a tool to be utilized that DNR allows us to use. DNR is the Missouri Department of Natural Resources. Every water project in the state has to be permitted. You have to submit a construction permit application to DNR. That allows DNR to review construction plans, construction specifications, project manuals. It essentially gives them a chance to verify that these designs meet minimum design guides. Of course, these minimum design guides change from year to year, decade to decade. But anyways, with a 5-year plan, we can put together our hydraulic model, take all this data we've been collecting, we're continuing to collect, input it into the hydraulic model, and identify needs, identify where the best, for lack of a better term, replacement and lining projects are located within the system. Where can we loop and add redundancy, add resiliency to the system? The 5-year plan, it takes a little more time up front, but it saves time on the back end because a 5-year plan, once that's permitted by DNR, it basically gives the city something they can pull off the shelf as timing allows, and start executing projects rather than every individual project goes into a separate permit application. Along with that, built into that 5-year plan is, like I said, identifying priority projects and also associating probable cost estimates with those projects. We don't want to have our head in the sky and say we can replace all 60 miles, in 5 years. That's not realistic. So we have to put cost estimates to these projects and analyze funding mechanisms and funding resources. And then we can capture need and capture cost simultaneously.
Jason, I will say one of the things that has been really helpful for me as you guys have worked through that 5-year plan and kind of estimating has been, from my standpoint, they are coming with, here's how much we think we'll spend in engineering, here's how much it will cost for construction. And I have challenged both Tony and Jason for, when do you think design will begin? When do you think construction will begin? And when do you think construction will be completed? Because we know, and we knew this whenever we asked voters to authorize $10 million, that can't all occur in 1 year. And so we're able to align, when we think we'll need funding with a potential bond issue. Because if for us, it doesn't make sense necessarily to go issue all $10 million worth of bonds right now and start paying that principal and interest. It may make sense to do it in smaller chunks along the way, in order to get that work done. And so while we're not finished with that, and a lot of that I think will also depend on the hydraulic model as we get a little bit closer, it has been really good information and probably some of the best that I have seen out of Public Works in the time that I've been here. Really helpful.
Yeah, and Jason, if you want to, I don't know if you want to just kind of give us an update as where we're at with that hydraulic model. I think we're very, very close to having that completed.
Yeah, so my colleague Ben, I'm of course in our Lead Summit office. My colleague Ben has been working on interpreting the data that's been collected. Basically, we looked through that 17 years of water use data, amongst other things. We normalize that down to what's an average gallon per minute that's used per water meter. And also, where do we have maybe our top 10 or 20 large water users? All that is plugged into literally a model of the water system. If you look at the screen, there's nodes and there's lines, and they represent pipes and system connections, etc. So the initial, we'll call it the existing system model, is created and done. And that takes a while to get to that point. We're at that point. Now we need to interpret that data. Once that data is interpreted and we're comfortable, we understand kind of what the system's showing us, then we can go into the model and figure out our needs and model our proposed 5-year plan projects. What you don't want to do, what you don't want to do is start executing projects without understanding how those new projects are going to impact the system. So once you have a model created that's of your existing system, then you can quickly model your proposed system. Where are we going year 1? Where are we going year 2? Where are we going year 5? And like I had mentioned, it's unfortunately it does take time up front, but you want to do it right because we don't want to create more issues by solving one issue, essentially. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah. And I think it's fair to say that once this 5-year plan is completed, we'll be starting almost right away on our next 5-year plan, so that we're not behind. We're continuing this process of improving the system
Yeah,
by
exactly.
steps right after the other.
And one thing I like to tell folks too, and most people probably already know this, but in 2024, and of course this varies from place to place and project to project, but a generally good estimate for replacing a mile of water line is $1 million. If we have 60 miles in our system like we do in Pleasant Hill, 20 of those we know are old and we need to start replacing. That's $20 million, right? You're obviously not going to do that at first. So if we get into a program where we're replacing so many miles a year, we can assume those costs. And you can quickly kind of see how long it takes. There's no real easy button, right? It takes a while to replace infrastructure. And it takes long enough that once you've gone through an iteration of replacing what you need to replace or adding lines to your system, the process just starts all over again. Infrastructure, it just ages, and that's what it does. So yeah, I think you're absolutely right. A 5-year plan also helps you. It's simple, as it says in the title, it helps you plan. One other thing I want to mention, with these water projects, we already talked about permitting a little bit, and that's through DNR. Unfortunately, that does take time. It is kind of a safety net for design. It gives another jurisdiction authority to review plans and specifications. If we do any projects in a state highway like Highway 7, we also have to apply for a right-of-way construction permit application. That gives MoDOT, in this case, the chance to review plans and specs, make sure that our new utilities aren't impacting their infrastructure. That too takes time. You couple that with the fact that we need easements in some cases when our utilities get outside of, say, a roadway right-of-way. We're going to need an easement. An easement is a legal right to the land above a utility. Usually it's about 5 to 10 feet wide for the length of the utility. So we need a permanent easement in some cases. And I highly recommend when we're doing projects to go out and get temporary construction easements. Those are generally 15, 20, 40 feet wide. And of course, like the name says, those are temporary. And it's simply built to allow the contractor to execute their work with enough space that they can execute it safely and efficiently. You don't always need a temporary construction easement, but I've found over the years that when we don't have those temporary construction easements, we're bound to get some cost escalation in the project just due to confined spaces.
Hey, Jason,
Mhm.
just for context, and now I forgot the number. Do you remember on that 7 highway water line replacement? Do you remember how many easements and temporary construction easements we needed? I wanted to say it was like in the ballpark of 30.
Yeah, no, you're right. So that
Yeah.
project, we're still looking, that project might get reduced a little bit and it will reduce the need or the number of
Yeah.
easements. But temporary construction easements was 30. I think permanent easements was about 19.
Okay.
Yeah, that sounds right.
Okay.
And so yeah, we've hit on the exploring new ideas and emerging technology, how that can help us.
Jason, can I interrupt real quick? Only because while we're talking about this, we did have a question, just kind of what is our timeline for this 5-year plan that we are working on? I didn't know if you or Tony had an estimated or approximate time when we think we'll have it done and ultimately submitted to DNR for their review.
Yeah, that's a great question. And of course, that's fluid. In my mind and my personal goal is to have that done by the end of the year at the latest. And then generally, and it varies from project to project. Generally, you allow 4 weeks for DNR review and hopefully approval. When you do submit your stuff to DNR, it does open up the door for them to comment and request changes to your proposed project. So looking at the end of the year.
Okay, but correct me, like obviously couple of our other projects, we went ahead and submitted those plans separately outside of the 5-year plan, including like the 7 highway water line improvements so that we can, get those projects started, obviously then while they're reviewing the 5-year plan for the next kind of set of projects. Is that correct?
That's exactly right. And in fact, on this Highway 7 water line job and the pump house job, we've already gone through permitting and we already have approval from DNR. Highway 7, we're still waiting on approval from MoDOT. And that should be coming soon. But yeah, that's exactly right. So those are outside of the 5-year plan.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. And so like we've talked about already, the pump house, the construction contract has been awarded. It's in the early stages of that project to the point where we're in the process of getting equipment and system submittals from the contractor. They will give us all these submittals. It gives the city and engineers a chance to review those submittals, make sure they comply with contract documents. Tony, did you want to hit on the water tower project?
Yeah, I can hit on the water tower project just a little bit, and then I also want to talk about the lift stations because if we get water in, it got to go someplace, and we've got some improvements that we're working on our lift stations also. We've already gone into a contract with USG regarding the water tower, and basically a full rehab to bring the water tower up to current DNR standards, including painting, some structural repairs inside. I think it was adding a mixer inside the tank or the bowl. So that one, as soon as the pump house is completed, that one is scheduled to happen. We're just kind of in limbo right now, waiting for that pump house to be completed so that we can control our system off of the VFD pumps, as we talked about earlier. So I'll just go into we've got Timber Lift Station. That is our sewer lift station. That one is in the design phase right now. Survey's been completed. I think we're getting really close to having plans, if I'm not mistaken, Jason.
Yeah, plans and specifications and construction project manuals are being put together right now.
Yes, and then we just approved at the last council meeting also 3 lift station improvements, which is full pump replacement, piping, controls, putting these lift stations basically up into our century, I guess you'd call it, to where we can have monitoring and basically we can operate these lift stations through our SCADA system, which is not possible right now. We don't have that capability. So those things are in the works. We also are looking at, I think we're looking at a design on a couple of other ones. I think Myrtle, and then
Hickory Hills, maybe?
Hickory Hills.
Hickory
Yep,
Hill.
we were looking at some different options there as well. So it's not just the water system. We're working really hard on our sewer system as well. As if anybody was listening to the council meeting the other night, Jeff Shook was there talking about metering our water system or our water that goes to the treatment plant, which is going to be coming up in 2027. So we're working on I&I, trying to reduce our infiltration into our sewer system as well. So.
Yeah. Oh, hold on. Can we go back one, Kylie, real quick? One of the things that's listed in here on projects that are in the design phase to be implemented is the Country Club Drive water line. I don't think it's any secret to anyone in town that over multiple years, we continue to experience a number of water main breaks on Country Club Drive. Really, I want to say in one particular area, but it's actually a longer stretch than I'd probably like to admit. And so what we're looking at on this one are actually two different modes. And this is one that we regularly kind of bounce back and forth. There are times where it will make sense to fully dig up and replace a water main. But there are also times in which it may make more sense to just rehab the line that you have with this technology of lining. And so what? Say that again.
I'm sorry, I just cleared my throat.
Oh, okay, sorry.
Sorry.
And so what we're looking at on Country Club Drive is probably a combination of both. There will be sections that we will be designing for a full, dig up and replacement. But there are other areas in which we think that relining could make sense. And at Monday's council meeting, we had USG present to talk about their spray in place polymer lining that we think is a good candidate on Country Club Drive on the east end of our line, really from Hillcrest to the east. And so even though we do need DNR permit or a construction permit for that, we do think that there are projects like that can go a little bit quicker, that we could execute in a more timely fashion than we could the full, dig up and replace. Tony or Jason, do you have anything else to talk about that?
Yeah, and I think it's going to come down to, there's a lot of things that we got to look at. We got to look at the size of the main, the amount of flow that we can get to that area. We're looking at low pressure issues in certain areas of town, which, is probably going to be on a 4-inch line. That is not a good candidate for a lining. That's a place where we're going to have to dig it up and replace it to upsize that line in order to get flow to those areas. The east end of Country Club is a perfect candidate for the lining just because it's already an 8-inch main, which is the standard size for a water main. It gives us the fire flow we need and the capacity for the residents in that area.
Yeah, one of the others that we're looking at kind of in that 5-year plan have been multiple places in which we could loop our water system. And what that really is going to do is it's going to provide a redundancy. And I'm going to use 7 Highway as an example. One of the things that we have designed into that 7 Highway project is an extension of a new line that would then service the Highland Park area. Because right now, whenever we experience a water main break, if there is something shut off on Renee Lind or Christopher or in the Highland Park subdivision, that is their only source of water in there. And so if we have that redundancy and that loop, not only on a day-to-day basis does it provide a little bit more of a resiliency of the system, it allows us to still supply water to people in times that we may need to shut water service off, that there's a secondary supply to them. And there are multiple other places that we're looking at the same thing. Additionally, and Tony and Jason, you guys can talk about this too, there are challenges where there are dead end systems. And so sometimes looping those will provide a better water quality to people that are on the end of the line and or reduce our staff time spent clearing out those lines.
It's a really good point, Shelby. When you have a dead end line, when you have a dead end line and maybe you don't have as many service connections on that line, if somebody's on vacation for a week or otherwise not using a whole lot of water, that water on that dead end can get stagnant that otherwise wouldn't get stagnant on a loop line or a very active line.
Yeah.
And generally speaking, we loop whenever we can. financially it makes sense. It does add that resiliency and redundancy component to areas of the system. That's a good thing. And then, for the Country Club Drive, the water line project, Tony, you spoke on that a little bit, but just with that technology where it makes sense, the timing is a lot quicker than putting in a new line, and the disruption to service is less. And the impacts to, say, traffic or people that are using driveways, it's just a lot less impactful. It's a really
When you're looking at basically, I would say probably a 30 to 60 day project that we can do from start to finish in 2 weeks or less. That's a huge benefit to doing the lining versus the full on replacement.
Yeah, 100%.
Hey, Shelby, I just wanted to put in
Yeah.
the two. It is frustrating. We have to submit for permits, go through DNR. As Jason said, if they have comments or they want different things, then there has to be a new submittal and it goes through a review. One of the things that we've talked with our state representatives about is, when projects don't fit the emergency need, it's not something that has to happen overnight. That there needs to be a mechanism for local governments to be able to expedite the review process, get to the front of the line when you have systems that maybe need repairs a little quicker than other things. And it's not going to help us in this project. It's probably going to be a lot more work to do that. But those are things that, as elected leaders, that we've really been reaching out to our resources to try to expedite those processes for the engineers and our people.
Yeah, thanks for that. I mean, sometimes in an emergency, you can get that approval pretty quickly, but you hope that it doesn't get to that point. And that's why that 5-year plan, the owner supervised plan, makes a lot of sense, because then we can just work on our own timeline with one approval. Nikki, one of the questions that was asked is, should the city be working the 5-year plan by April or May of next year at the latest? And Jason, I'm going to kind of lead this one to you, but I see in our work plan or our tentative plan, and again, some of the projects may shift in the end, but right now, yeah, we do have some projects that we're slated to go into design. Now, again, that design to construction time period is a little longer. But I have projects that I see as either started or completed by the end of 2025. And some of them that will be in design by April or May of next year.
Yeah,
Now,
I agree.
again, it always depends on if there's anything else that occurs or any hiccups that we have in our approval process, but it's possible. Yeah.
Yeah, you got the approval process. You also have, with the 5-year plan, it's a little less of a permitting issue, but with each specific project, you need to make sure that if you need easements, you're getting them from a legality standpoint. And that, of course, takes some time. But, no, I lost my train of thought. There's a lot of variables that go into play with that. And the other thing too, I would mention is, once you have a permitted 5-year plan, it's easy for me to sit here and let's put 100 projects on year one. Well, we've got to be cautious of community fatigue too. We want to improve our system, but we don't want to have every street closed also, so there's other variables that need to be considered when we're looking at a time frame.
Jason, one of the other questions was, will the 5-year plan give us specific task goals and be measurable?
Yes. So the beauty of the 5-year plan is that to do it correctly, you have to lay out a plan for all 5 years, at least. You can go beyond 5 years too. We can very easily in year one have 2 or 3 identifiable clear-cut projects. Year two, we could say replace 4-inch water mains within the system. which is obviously a lot less specific than, hey, let's loop 58 highway. Does that answer that question? The plan does allow for some flexibility. It's really given the community a chance to identify needs and address those needs, however best works for the community.
Yeah, I would say the biggest thing for me is that it's going to give us the ability, one, to determine when it best fits or aligns
Yes.
within a certain time period. We have benchmarks built in of here's when we anticipate starting this one, and it almost feeds the budget for us. And the budget really is the work plan on any given year. And so knowing which year to slate in other projects, that's effectively, I mean, every city does capital planning. That it's another step of capital planning, saying in this year we anticipate doing this project.
Well, and I think it also too gives us the opportunity to, obviously put those projects together with others. So as an example, which, you can hear a lot. You want to replace a water line prior to Tony having it in his plans to overlay that street, right? So it allows, the ability to not only look at the water system, but because obviously that's what so many people are hyper focused on, but kind of like you mentioned earlier, like we have wastewater improvements that have to be made. And sometimes again, you have to coordinate those projects also with, either an overlay or a curb or a sidewalk project. And so I see that as a benefit of the 5-year plan too, so that we can kind of, again, work it and like, okay, instead of saying we want, we're submitting this project and we want to do it now, but oh shoot, it's the street overlay is in 2 years. Okay, well, we can then maybe move this one and then move this one around over here to make sure that we're coordinating all of our projects in the most effective and efficient way possible.
Yeah, and a good example of that is where we stopped with the microsurfacing on Country Club. That's the reason that we stopped at Hillcrest with that, is because of the planning that's behind the scenes of replacing that line to the west on Country Club.
And Tony, correct me if I'm wrong. Isn't that kind of also we're working on whatever improvements that kind of need to be made on Broadway as well? Because we also know there's some improvements on
Yes.
Broadway, both infrastructure, water infrastructure wise, street, that sort of thing. So obviously trying to coordinate those together is in all of our best interest.
Yeah, and then like you mentioned, when we start digging up a water line on a street, we've got to look at the manholes from the sewer line condition. That's one of the reasons why, it was very, very early on that I came here that we purchased our own sewer camera trailer. And we are in the process of viewing every foot of our sewer lines that we can in town, so that we can have that data that when we go to start designing water line replacements or sewer line replacements, we have all the information that we need, whether it's a good application to line that sewer line, or if it's in a condition where we need to fully replace it. So.
As of right now, I think we have answered most of the question, or all of the questions, I guess it really looks like, coming back up in here. So honestly, if you're out there and you're still listening and you've got another question and you want to put it in there, and we'll take a look at it as well and try to get with you. If not, I'll kind of just do a quick wrap up if you guys, give you a moment if you have anything else to add. But we really do hope, it is our hope that you found this evening's presentation meaningful and informative. I mean, really our staff, Jason, professional partners, we've mentioned numerous ones throughout tonight's session that, we are all, we continue and we're all committed to providing safe and reliable drinking water to all of our customers. So we get that any disruption to the service can signal inconveniences and some in more ways than the other. But we know, as mentioned before too, that we're not alone. This happens, there's infrastructure needs all over the United States, but we truly are focused here in Pleasant Hill on minimizing them and truly making the infrastructure improvements that are needed. We still continue to work diligently to minimize them, but our focus will still be on these improvements, both to water and wastewater systems. So Real quick, somebody commented, is it possible to copy of this? I think we are recording it. Is it going to go on our website, Shelby, or?
So I was thinking that this one will be uploaded to YouTube as long as they will allow us to. I have heard
Okay.
some rumblings from other cities that YouTube has not been the most friendly recently. But yes, we are recording it and we will make it available. My guess is it will end up on YouTube.
Yeah, we'll work through that, David, obviously, like I said, on the length of it and the size of the file. But yes, we do have it and we'll work our best to make it available to you in the easiest way possible. So anything else? Again, we appreciate everybody's time and interest in our first, as the mayor said, virtual town hall. I'm not going to lie, a little nervous. You know, you add a whole component of this tech component and it worked. So anything else, guys?
I don't have anything else. It's just if anyone has any questions, we will try our best to answer.
If people come up with questions later on, just reach out to city staff. Council will try to get answers. There was a lot to digest. So I appreciate everybody being patient. Like Nikki said, this was our first virtual town hall. I was a little nervous myself. So I hope that we can add this with some more things to really try to branch out and hit more of our population and give them access.
Thank you, Mayor. Okay, well, I still don't see anything popping up. Thanks, Sue. We appreciate you joining us this evening. So yeah, I think like the mayor said, we'll go ahead and end it. If you have anything else, obviously there's multiple ways you can reach us, whether it's through the website. We have like a contact us on there, social media, you know, or again, directly from the website, you can hit emails in there and the mayor, the council and city staff. So, all right, well, I will close it down. I hope everybody has a great evening. We really appreciate you spending some time with us this evening, and we'll look forward to our next one.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank you all.
guys.